Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John, here to tell you what it is in Samson Part 3. Alright, if you remember last time, we were talking about Samson gave a riddle at his wedding ceremony. Remember, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. And they couldn't figure out the riddle, and they ended up tricking his wife into giving him the answer. Okay, you know, everything in the Bible has some meaning, and even though this riddle, it is probably the stupidest riddle ever. There's no way anybody could figure out, because it's a personalized thing that only Samson knows that he had killed this lion. And only Samson knows that when he walked back past, he saw a beehive in the lion. So unless you're Samson, you don't get it. Remember, they've made a point of saying that he did not tell his mother and father that he killed the lion. He didn't tell his mother and father that he got the honey out. So nobody knows about this lion incident except for Samson. So there's no way anybody could figure out the riddle. Of course, they got the answer out of his wife, right? And he knows immediately that they did that because that's the only way they could get the answer. But it's, you know, what is the significance of that riddle? That's a good question. And that riddle always kind of, you know, I like the Samson story, lots of good stuff in it, but that riddle always kind of threw me. You know, why does that fit in there? You know, one thing I was thinking about this just this past week. You know, there's the concept of that your sins will find you out. All right, and Samson, he shouldn't be touching a dead body, a dead carcass, and that's not even part of his Nazirite vow. The Nazirite vow is, yes, you can't touch a dead human, but just a Jewish law, if you touch a dead animal, you are unclean for the rest of the day. So, by Samson not telling anybody that he had killed the lion and that he had scooped honey out of it, he was ceremonially unclean for the rest of the day. So, by telling this riddle, he's giving hints that he has touched a dead animal. Now, it may not be a big deal because he's telling this hint to Philistines who don't even follow these rules. You understand? But it's something that's almost like whenever you do something wrong, you want someone to know, right? You robbed the bank and you got away with it, and you just can't be happy with that. You have to brag about your little getting away with whatever sin you were doing. And that might be part of why Samson used this particular riddle. And what else could this represent? You know, I was wondering if maybe the land of Canaan, which God promised the Jews, promised the descendants of Abraham, you know, when they got there, it's full of all these bad groups, all the different ites, right? The Jebusites and the whatever ites. And that might be like the roaring lion. But the Jews overcame and wiped them out, and then the land became a land of milk, flowing with milk and honey. So there might be some tie-in with that, okay? And then there's also the whole concept of Yeshua, Jesus. He defeats Satan. We know the verse in 1 Peter, I've gotten to this time, 1 Peter that says that the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So Jesus, Yeshua, defeats Satan, and then we're going to have, that's good, right? That's the good thing. Satan's gone, and now Yeshua's, Jesus' words are sweet as honey. I'm not sure what the exact tie-in is. There's got to be one, and I'm sure you will write to me and tell me if you have another one. Thank you. Okay, Judges chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. It says, now Samson went to Gaza, and he saw a harlot there, and he went into her. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place, and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until morning light, then we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts and pulled them up, along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders, and he carried them to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. Okay, what's this? Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. What is Samson doing in Gaza with a harlot? That's a good question. You know, if you go back to, what was the first spoken word of Samson? It's Judges 14:2. He said, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. And what's the second spoken word of Samson? It's Judges 14:3. But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She looks good to me. It kind of sounds like Samson, he's got an eye for the women, right? Those are his first two words, spoken words. But then on the other hand, if you go to the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, Hebrews 11, if you know Hebrews 11, this is the hall of faith, right? God, he lists all the big guys and what they did. We can just read a couple of them here, starting in verse 4. By faith, Abel was offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Verse 5, by faith, Enoch was taken up so he would not see death. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not seen. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place. By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the Exodus. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. By faith, Rahab, the harlot, did not perish. You understand? These are the pillars of faith in the Bible. And if you continue on reading through Hebrews 11, starting in verse 32, it says, and what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, and became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. Wow! I mean, if Samson is listed in the hall of faith, which is it? Is Samson a bad egg where he's a womanizer and zipping around looking at women? Or is he following what God wanted? Remember, there was the point where it said, remember his parents was wondering, why are you going after these Philistine women? And it's something about the parents didn't realize that God was setting them up for this, right? He was planning for Samson to go down. This was part of God's plan. And you know, if you look at this here, it says, so he went and came into the house of a harlot. When I read that, when you read that, what do you think? But notice, if I do this to it, watch, boom. So they went and came into the house of a harlot. What's the difference? When I see he went into the house of the harlot, I think Samson, oh, he's going in to sleep with a harlot. But when I see they went into the house of a harlot, that actually is part of Joshua 2:1. Remember when Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 spies secretly from Shittim saying, go, view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of a harlot, whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. You know, when I see the two spies go into Rahab, the house of the harlot, I don't automatically think that they're going in for sex. Do you? No, they're going in to hide because they're in a foreign enemy territory. Right? And the same, I think, is true with Samson. He's down in Gaza. Enemy territory. Where do you hide if you're Samson and you're in enemy territory? You can't be sitting in the town square. They'll see you. Right? So he goes into a harlot, and that's a good place to hide out. I don't think he's going in there for the bad reasons. Okay? Here's that verse from Joshua. The harlot is an Isha Zanah. And it's the same word here in Judges 16:1. Isha Zanah. And they both have the word bo, which is to go. Alright? Very nice. Okay, Joshua 2:2. You know, in that Joshua story, there's almost a little parallel here between these the spies and Samson. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here." So the locals discover a presence of a foreigner. And in Judges 16:2, when it was told to the Gazites, saying, "Samson has come here," they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night. In Joshua, then Rahab, she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. There's a spectacular nighttime escape of the two spies. And in Samson, there's going to be a spectacular nighttime escape. It says, "Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts and pulled them up along with the bars." Right? Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. You know, this reminds me of, in the Akedah, we did a video on this, Genesis 22. Remember the Akedah? Akedah is Hebrew for the binding. This is what they call that whole story, the binding of Isaac. Starting in verse 15, "Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, 'By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, indeed I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies.'" That is the promise that was made to Abraham, that his seed would possess the gate of their enemies. And look what's happened here. Here's a picture of the Damascus gate in Jerusalem. And you see what I have here. This is a bad picture, but nevertheless, there's three guys standing here. These are Israeli soldiers. The Damascus gate is on the east side of Jerusalem. If you leave the Damascus gate and go 140 miles, you're in Damascus, Syria. This is the Muslim side of Jerusalem. Yet the Jews are possessing the gate of their enemies. Here you can see during the daytime there's a new little guard house right outside there. It's very fortified, and the Jewish soldiers are in there. The Jews are possessing the gate of their enemies. Here's another one that they built, and the soldiers are in here. This is up the stairs from the Damascus gate. And we see that here in Judges 16:3. Samson, he raises at midnight, he goes to the city gate, he pulls them up, puts them on his shoulders, and carries them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. Samson is possessing the gate of his enemies. How cool is that? All right. Judges 16:4. It says, after this it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Okay? Okay, he's in the valley of Sorek. Sorek means choicest vine. Got it? Which also then ties in with grapes. Remember, Samson is under this Nazirite vow where he can't have grapes, he can't get a haircut, and he can't touch dead bodies. Okay, that's the Nazirite rules. So, and you know, it's kind of interesting. Whenever Samson killed the lion earlier, he was walking through the vineyards of Timnah. If you're walking through vineyards, what's growing there? Grapes. And those grapes, how often do you walk through it? You walk through a blackberry patch and you're tempted to pull them off and start popping them into your mouth, right? The same thing, I think, in a vineyard. But Samson, he's being tempted. He's walking through a vineyard, but he's not plucking grapes off and eating them. That's a good thing. He's keeping his Nazirite vow. All right? And here again, he's in the valley of Sorek, which means the choicest vine. So there's going to be more temptation for grapes. Okay? And he meets this woman named Delilah. Delilah means low and languishing, okay? But we've heard part of her name somewhere else. If you go back to Genesis 1:5, we covered this on the Creator Week, the first edition, first part. Verse 5, it says, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day, day one. Okay, Vayikra Elohim Va'or Yaom V'lachoshek Kara Lila. Remember, Choshek was darkness. Kara, we just talked about in part 2. Kara is he called, and he called the darkness Lila. Lila means nighttime. Okay? Well, you hear that word in her name, Delilah. Okay? So there's a hint of nighttime in Delilah's name. And if you remember, what does Samson's name mean? Samson is Shimshon. Shimshon comes from Shemesh. Shemesh is the sun. Ah, how interesting. We got these two characters. One is sunshine, one is nighttime. Okay, Judges 16:5. The lords of the Philistine came up to her and said to her, entice him and see where his great strength lies, and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Okay, these lords of the Philistines, we know from Joshua 13:3 that there were 5 of them. Okay, the 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazite, the Ashdodite, the Ashkelonite, the Gittite, and the Ekronite. So she's about to get, what, 5,500 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson,
please, tell me where your great strength is, and how you may be bound to afflict you.
Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now, she had men lying in wait in the inner room, and she said to them,
the Philistines are upon you, Samson.
But he snapped the cords as a string of toe snaps when it touches fire. so his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson,
Behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me how you may be bound.
He said to her, If they bind me tightly with new ropes, which have not been used, then I will become weak like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him,
The Philistines are upon you, Samson.
For the men were lying in wait in the inner room, but he snapped the ropes from his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson,
Up to now you have deceived me and told me lies. Tell me how you may be bound.
And he said to her, If you weave the 7 locks of my hair with the web and fasten it with a pin, then I will become weak like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his hair and wove them into a web. And she fastened it with a pin and said to him,
The Philistines are upon you, Samson.
But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin of the loom and the web. Then she said to him,
How can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have deceived me these 3 times, and have not told me where your great strength is.
It came about when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was annoyed to death. Okay, she's nagging and nagging and nagging until his soul is vexed to the point of death. But you know what I'm wondering? How stupid is Samson? So far, Delilah has deceived him 3 times. And each time, she yells, the Philistines are upon you. And there are Philistines upon him. They're hiding and waiting in wait for him. At this point, by this point, Samson should be asking, why, Delilah? He should see that girl was no good, but he was lost like a slave that no man could free. Okay, verse 17. So he told her all that was in his heart, and said to her, A razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all that was in his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying,
Come up once more, for he has told me all that is in his heart.
Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his hair. Then she began to afflict him, and his strength left him. She said,
The Philistines are upon you, Samson.
And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze chains, and he was a grinder in the prison. There was a blinding, a binding, and a grinding. You know, if you go back, again, we've talked about this before. What were the first and second spoken words of Samson? I saw a woman in Timnah. Get her for me. And Samson said to her father, get her for me, to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. His eyes, his roaming eyes, were Samson's downfall. And now he don't have any. And you know what else? We told you Delilah, remember she has what in her name? Lila, nighttime. And Samson, Shimshon, has Shemesh, sun. And what happens when the sunshine goes down into the nighttime? He can't see. All right. That's pretty clever, God. That's very clever. Judges 16:22. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it was shaved off. Now the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice, for they said, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, "Our God has given our enemy into our hands, even the destroyer of our country, who has slain many of us." 25. It so happened, when they were in high spirits, that they said, "Call for Samson, that he may amuse us." So they called for Shimshon from the prison, and he entertained them, and they made him stand between the pillars. Then Samson said to the boy who was holding his hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And about 3,000 men and women were on the roof, looking on while Shimshon was amusing them. Verse 28. Then Shimshon called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." You know, this is interesting. This is Samson's second prayer. Does anyone remember what his first prayer was? His first prayer was back in Judges 15. Remember, he had just had the big fight and killed a bunch of people. And it says, then he became, this is after he killed the 1,000 people with the jawbone of an ass. And in 15:18 it says, then he became very thirsty, and he called to the Lord and said, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" His first prayer was kind of not very nice. But I think things have changed a bit here, and now this is a true prayer he's giving here on his second prayer, Judges 16:28. He wants avenged for his 2 eyes. Very nice. Verse 29. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the one with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. It's kind of interesting. Samson is standing between the 2 pillars, and he sacrifices himself. He knocks down the pillars and knocks down the whole house. And we see a parallel there with Yeshua, because Yeshua, he became a sacrifice, and he was sacrificed between 2 crosses. I see that's kind of a parallel between Yeshua and Samson. Verse 31. Then his brothers and all his father's household came down, took him, and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoach, his father. Thus he had judged Israel 20 years. Remember, Manoach, Noach means rest. So Samson is finally achieving or receiving his eternal rest in the tomb of Manoach, in the tomb of rest. Very nice. Okay. All right. Well, this ends the Samson story, kind of, but we got bonuses. And we also have a part 4. But let's do today's bonus. The question is Samson, is he a good egg or a bad egg? You know, I always wondered, you know, a lot of times you read about Samson and it portrays him as, well, he had his Nazirite vow and he broke everything. He had a wedding feast and he was getting drunk and he was chasing after women and he got his hair cut and he wasn't supposed to. So I want to know, is Samson a good or a bad egg? Well, let's look. Let's go back to Judges chapter 2, verse 16. It says, "Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of these raiders." And in verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up a judge for the Israelites, he was with that judge, and he delivered them from the hands of their enemies while the judge was still alive. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. So, first of all, God himself raised up, the Lord Yahweh raised up these judges. So that's a point in Samson's favor, in all the judges' favor. The Lord raised them up. We see it in Judges 3, verse 9. "But when the Israelites cried out to Yahweh, he raised up Othniel, son of Kenaz, as a deliverer to save them." In verse 10, it says, "The Spirit of Yahweh came upon him, and he became Israel's judge, and he went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel." Verse 15, "And again they cried out to Yahweh, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera." You understand? The Lord is raising up these judges. So that's got to be a point for them. Another point is, on these judges, look at the Spirit of Yahweh came upon them. Judges 3:10, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon Othniel." Judges 6:34, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon." Judges 11:29, "And the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah." And in Samson's case, there are 4 instances. Judges 13:25, "The Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him." Judges 14:6, "And the Spirit of the Lord took control of him." Judges 14:19, "And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him." Judges 15:14, "When Samson arrived in Lehi, the Philistines came out shouting against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him." God is sending his Spirit to strengthen these judges. So God is on their side. These judges are spiritual leaders who are trying to rein in Israel, who keeps chasing after foreign gods and doing bad things. So we see that the judges, including Samson, they have God's blessing. And they are an antitype of Yeshua, right? Who is our eternal judge. In Judges 11:27, it says, "I have not sinned against you, but you have done me wrong by waging war against me. May the Lord, the judge, decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites." This is when they were about to go to war. I think this is with Ehud against the Ammonites. So here it says, "May Yahweh, the judge." He is the eternal judge. And the judges that he appointed along the way are antitypes of him. Nice picture. Okay, well, what about some specific shortcomings of Samson? Well, the 2 big ones are that he violated his Nazirite vow, and he was a womanizer. Well, let's look at those. On the Nazirite vow side, remember, he's not supposed to have grapes, he's not supposed to get a haircut, and he's not supposed to touch a corpse. And, just by the way, the Nazirite vow, if you remember, it's if a man or woman wants to make a special vow. Samson didn't get that choice. So is it officially a Nazirite vow? Because he was appointed to be a Nazirite from birth. So he didn't really get the if they want to. But let's assume he's got the Nazirite vow. The first thing is he can't touch, or he touched a dead lion. Does that disqualify him? Well, the Nazirite vow found in Numbers 6, verses 6 through 8, it says, all the days of his separation to the Lord, he shall not go near to a dead person. He shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, or for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he is holy to the Lord. Notice what the requirement is. You may not go near to a dead person. By Samson touching a dead lion, that does not disqualify him from his Nazirite vow. Yes, it does make him unclean until nightfall. If you touched a dead person, the regular rule is if you touch a dead person, you're unclean for 7 days. A Nazirite's not supposed to touch a dead person at all. But a Nazirite, he can touch a dead lion, he will be unclean until nightfall, but this does not disqualify him. Okay, so I'm going to call this one not guilty by him touching a lion. Okay. He drank wine, some accuse him of. Well, in Judges 14:5 it says Samson went down to Timnah with his father and his mother, and he came as far as the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came running toward him. So he's walking through vineyards, and I'm sure he's tempted with big clusters of grapes hanging all over, but nowhere does it say he ate any of them. And in Judges 14:10-11, it says, then his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, for the young men customarily did this. And when they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Okay, he's having a feast, a bachelor party, a 7-day hoo-ha. And I can only imagine that the wine is flowing, but nowhere here does it say he drank any of it. Well, so, oh, that's impossible. No, it's not impossible. I myself, I don't drink. I just don't like the taste of it. But the point is, I have been to wedding celebrations, and I'm quite happy with a Diet Coke. You understand? So, it doesn't say he drank. So, and also, remember, he went to the Valley of Sorek, which means the choice vine, where he met Delilah. And nowhere does it say he drank, so I'm giving him a not guilty on that. And as for cutting his hair, it says in Judges 16:19, she, Delilah, made him sleep on her knees, and called for a man, and had him shave off the 7 locks of his hair. Then she began to afflict him, and his strength left him. I'm giving him a not guilty here. Why? Because he did not cut off his hair. Somebody else did it. He was betrayed, right? And you can't fault him for that. He didn't cut it off. Now some say he was a womanizer. He had a wife. He went to the harlot. He met Delilah. Okay? Well, on the wife line, Judges 14:4, it says, however, his father and mother did not know that it was of Yahweh. For he was, this wife, he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. And now at this time the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So, taking this Philistine wife, this was of the Lord. Right? And is taking a Philistine wife even wrong? If you go back to the law, Exodus 34, starting in verse 11, and we'll read 11 and 16, it says, be sure to observe what I am commanding you this day. Behold, I am going to drive out the Amorite before you, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. And you might take, because he's worried that you might take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. He repeats all this in Deuteronomy 7. He lists the groups. He says, don't intermarry. Don't give your daughters to their sons, and don't give your sons to their daughters. But nowhere in these lists does it list the Philistines as they cannot marry. So he's not guilty of marrying a Philistine wife. Okay? Not to mention, the Israelites at the time were pretty bad. They were so bad that God had to raise up a judge to kind of rein them back in. So it's not like going after an Israelite wife would have maybe been much better, right? They were whoring after the idols just as well. Okay, now, what about the harlot? It says Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and he went into her. Okay, we already mentioned this. Just because he went into her, so did the spies, right, in Jericho. That doesn't mean that they did anything bad with them. In Judges 4:22, this is a few judges back. When Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera, Yael went out to greet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man you are seeking." And he went into her, and there lay Sisera dead with a tent peg through his temple. It's the exact same phrase, and he went into her. Does anyone ever suspect that Barak went in to have sex with this woman? No. And just because Samson went into her does not mean he was going in for sex. Okay? We've mentioned earlier, we think he went in because it's a good place to hide when you're in the city of your enemy. Okay? So, I'm giving him a not guilty on the going with the harlot. Now, what about Delilah? And it says, after this it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. We don't know whether Delilah was a Philistine or an Israelite or other. We just don't know. But we do know that Samson loved her. Unfortunately, she betrayed him and delivered him to the Philistines. Again, we don't know what she is, but if she's a Philistine, there's no ban against that. Okay? And remember, Samson was from the tribe of Dan. Okay? If you look at Judges 18, they called the name of their city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. Now, verse 30, the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that was that the house of God was in Shiloh. So you see, the Danites, had Samson gone and married or fallen in love with a Danite, that's not any better. The Danites, they're worshiping graven images, right? We know Dan, by the way, remember when Jacob gave the blessing to his children? Genesis 49. The blessing he gave to Dan was, verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. That's pretty cool that Jacob, he knew that Dan would become a judge, and Samson became a judge, and he's of the descendants of Dan. So, you know, we're saying here that Delilah, she betrayed him. So we can't really fault Samson on this one. It's no different than, remember when Joseph was taken to Egypt and he's working for Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife accuses him in Genesis 19:17, and she spoke to him these words, that speaking to Potiphar, the Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to make sport of me. Joseph is betrayed by a woman. You're not blaming Joseph for this. You see it again in the New Testament, Matthew 14:8. Having been prompted by her mother, she said, give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. She is betraying John the Baptist. You can't fault John the Baptist for this. And I don't think you can't fault Samson for having the haircut. But I am going to give Samson a guilty on this, but he was guilty of love. Okay, so let's not point him out as a womanizer. He's a man betrayed by woman. And remember, we know that both Samson's wife and Delilah, both of them handed Samson over to the Philistines for money. Follow the money. The love of money is the root of all evil. Okay? Okay. Well, God bless you for watching. May God get the honor. May God get the glory. May God get the praise. And we'll see you back in part 4. Bye-bye.